The mess hall was quiet when Lieutenant Daehyun walked in. He carried a small tray with his lunch and a data tablet tucked under his arm. His footsteps made barely any sound as he moved to his usual corner table. Nobody looked up when he passed. Nobody ever did. Daehyun was used to being invisible. He preferred it that way. On a ship filled with warriors from a dozen different alien species, he was just another low-ranking human officer. Small, quiet, forgettable. He sat down, placed his tray carefully on the table, and began eating his meal while reading from his tablet. The Harmony's Edge was a coalition diplomatic vessel. It traveled through space carrying ambassadors and peace negotiators to distant worlds. The crew was mixed. There were towering Kralix warriors with their forearms and scaled red skin. There were delicate Felani scientists with crystalline eyes and gentle voices. There were smooth-skinned Ordovian diplomats who believed words could solve any problem. And then there were the three humans. Captain Soman commanded the ship with a careful eye and a sharp mind. Engineer Minho kept the engines running deep in the lower decks, and Lieutenant Daehyun sat in his corner, doing his liaison work and bothering nobody. The doors to the mess hall burst open. Commander Vexith strode in with his security team behind him. Vexith was a Kralix 7 feet tall with muscles that rippled beneath his crimson scales. Battle scars crossed his face like badges of honor. His forearms flexed as he walked, each one capable of crushing bone. His team followed him like shadows, all of them armed and dangerous. Vexith's eyes scanned the room and landed on Daehyun. His mandibles clicked together in what passed for a Kralix smile. He changed direction, walking straight toward the human's table. His boots thudded against the metal floor with each deliberate step. Daehyun saw him coming but didn't look up from his tablet. He continued eating, chewing slowly and carefully. His dark eyes remained fixed on the screen even as the massive shadow fell across his table. Vexith reached out with one of his lower arms and knocked Daehyun's tray off the table. Food scattered across the floor. The metal tray clattered and spun before coming to rest near the wall. The sound echoed through the suddenly silent mess hall. Daehyun looked down at the mess on the floor. Then he carefully placed his tablet on the table and stood up. He was almost 2 feet shorter than the Kralix commander. He had to tilt his head back to look at Vexith's face. He said nothing. He simply bent down and began picking up the spilled food. Vexith laughed. It was a harsh, grating sound that filled the room. His security team joined in, their various species creating a chorus of mockery. Other crew members watched but said nothing. Some looked away in pity. Others watched with mild interest. "This is why humans don't belong in space," Vexith announced to the room. "Too weak, too soft. Too fragile. You break if we breathe on you too hard." Daehyun finished picking up his tray and the scattered food. He stood up again, his movements slow and careful. "Excuse me, Commander," he said quietly. "I need to get past." Vexith stepped aside, but not before his shoulder bumped into Daehyun hard enough to make the human stumble. More laughter followed as Daehyun walked to the disposal unit, dumped his ruined meal, and left the mess hall without looking back. The harassment didn't stop there. It never did. Over the following days, Vexith found new ways to remind everyone that humans were weak. He would bump into Daehyun in corridors, making him drop equipment. He would make loud comments on the bridge about how fragile humans were. He would suggest that someone so weak shouldn't hold any position of authority. One afternoon in the training room, Vexith challenged Daehyun to a sparring match. The human declined politely. Vexith shoved him hard with 2 of his forearms. Daehyun went sprawling across the training mat. He got up slowly, brushing himself off, and left without a word. The security team found this endlessly amusing. To them, Daehyun was the perfect target. He never fought back. He never complained. He just took the abuse in silence and went about his duties. But not everyone thought it was funny. Science Officer Linus, a Felani with compound eyes that caught every detail, watched these encounters with growing curiosity. She noticed things others missed. When Vexith shoved Daehyun in the training room, the human hadn't just fallen. He had positioned his body to absorb the impact perfectly. When he walked through crowded corridors, his eyes tracked every person, cataloging their positions without seeming to look at them. Linus began researching in her free time. She accessed old human military records, though most were classified. What she could find made her antenna twitch with interest. Humans had fought wars among themselves before joining the Galactic Coalition. Brutal wars. Wars that ended when special soldiers were deployed. Captain Soman noticed the harassment too. She called Daehyun to her quarters one evening, after a particularly bad incident on the bridge. The human stood at attention in her office, his face calm and neutral. "I can have Vexith disciplined," Soman said. She sat behind her desk, her hands folded in front of her. "His behavior is completely unacceptable. You shouldn't have to tolerate it." "That won't be necessary, Captain," Daehyun replied. His voice was soft and even. Soman studied him carefully. She had known him for 3 years. She knew things about him that no one else on this ship knew. "You've been very patient," she said. "Perhaps too patient." "I made a promise when I took this assignment," Daehyun said. His eyes were distant. "No more violence. No more death. And if circumstances force your hand?" Soman asked quietly. Daehyun didn't answer. He simply stood there looking at something beyond the walls of the ship. Soman dismissed him. After he left, she sat alone in her office staring at her screen. On it was Daehyun's real file. The classified one. The one that made her hands shake when she first read it. She hoped she would never have to see him become that person again. A week later, everything changed. The Harmony's Edge received a distress call from a coalition outpost in the outer reaches. The message was broken and filled with static, but the words were clear enough. "Pirates. Incoming attack. Send help." Ambassador Thex insisted they respond. The Ordovian diplomat stood on the bridge, his amphibious skin glistening under the lights. "We must help them," he said firmly. "We can negotiate with the pirates. No one needs to die." Captain Somin hesitated. The Harmony's Edge was a diplomatic vessel, not a warship. They had minimal weapons and a crew trained for peace talks, not combat. But the outpost needed help, and they were the closest coalition ship. She gave the order. The ship changed course toward the outer reaches. Vexith found Daehyun in a corridor that evening. The human was walking to his quarters after his shift. The Kralix commander stepped in front of him, blocking the narrow passage with his bulk. "When the fighting starts, little human, you should stay in your quarters," Vexith said. His mandibles clicked with amusement. "The real warriors will handle the danger. We wouldn't want you to get hurt." Daehyun looked up at him. For just a moment, something flickered in his dark eyes. Something cold and ancient and very, very dangerous. Then it was gone, hidden behind his usual calm expression. "Commander," Daehyun said quietly, "I hope it doesn't come to that." There was something in his voice, a weight, a warning that Vexith didn't understand. The Kralix laughed and walked away, his boots echoing down the corridor. Daehyun stood alone in the empty corridor for a long moment. Then he continued to his quarters, his footsteps silent as always. Behind his calm exterior, old memories stirred. Old training, old protocols that he had tried so hard to forget. He hoped the ambassador was right. He hoped words would be enough. Because if they weren't, if violence became necessary, he would have to break his promise. He would have to become someone he had left behind. Someone the galaxy called by another name. The Reaper. The Harmony's Edge dropped out of faster-than-light travel near the research outpost. The station floated in orbit around a massive gas giant, its rings stretching out like frozen rivers of ice and rock. Lights flickered on the station's hull. Some sections looked dark and damaged. On the bridge, Captain Soman studied the sensor displays. The outpost wasn't responding to their hails. That was never a good sign. She ordered the ship to yellow alert. Crew members moved to their stations with practiced efficiency. Daehyun stood at his liaison station, monitoring communication channels. His fingers moved across the controls with quiet precision. Around him, the bridge crew worked with nervous energy. Everyone could feel the tension in the air. Commander Vexith stood at the security station, his forearms crossed over his massive chest. He looked confident, almost eager. In his mind, this would be a chance to prove Kralix's superiority once again. Ambassador Thex moved forward, his smooth, amphibious skin reflecting the bridge lights. "Captain, let me try to establish contact. Perhaps the pirates will listen to reason." Soman nodded, though doubt showed in her eyes. The ship moved closer to the outpost. They began docking procedures with the station's main port. Everything seemed quiet, too quiet. Then the trap sprang shut. 8 massive warships decloaked from behind the gas giant's rings. They had been hiding there, waiting. Their hulls were patchwork metal, covered in weapons and stolen armor plating. Pirate vessels. Big ones. The main view screen flickered to life. A face appeared. It was huge and terrifying. Warlord Kragan. The Vorgath pirate lord stood 8 feet tall, with gray-green skin stretched over massive muscles. Rows of razor-sharp teeth filled his mouth. Scars covered his face and neck. His eyes were yellow and cruel. A coalition diplomatic vessel. Kragan's voice rumbled through the speakers. How very fortunate for us. Surrender now and I'll make your deaths quick. Fight and I'll make them last for days. Ambassador Thex stepped forward, his hands raised in a peaceful gesture. Warlord Kragan, there is no need for violence. We can discuss terms. The coalition would be willing to negotiate. Kragan laughed. It was a horrible sound, like rocks grinding together. Negotiate? I don't negotiate with prey. He made a gesture and the transmission cut off. Immediately, weapons lock alarms began shrieking across the bridge. The tactical display lit up with red warning indicators. 8 warships against 1 diplomatic vessel. The Harmony's Edge had basic defensive shields and a handful of small weapons. Nothing that could stand against a pirate fleet. Evasive maneuvers. Captain Summon ordered. Get us away from the station! The ship lurched as the pilot threw it into a hard turn. Energy blasts streaked past them, lighting up space with deadly colors. The shields flared as some shots connected. Warning lights flashed across every console. Multiple incoming. The tactical officer shouted. Boarding pods! 4 heavy pods launched from the nearest pirate ship. They burned through space on chemical thrusters, too fast for the Harmony's Edge to evade. They slammed into the hull with violent impacts that shook the entire vessel. Vexith's communicator crackled to life. Security teams, arm up. We have breaches on deck 3. He turned to his backup team on the bridge. With me. Time to show these scum what Kralix warriors can do. He rushed toward the lift, his team following. Their boots thundered against the deck plates. They were confident. They were trained warriors. They had faced danger before, but they had never faced pirates like these. On deck 3, the boarding pods had burned through the hull. 40 pirates poured into the corridor, armed with plasma rifles and blade weapons. They wore mismatched armor and moved with the confidence of warriors who had never lost a boarding action. Vexith and his security team arrived minutes later. They took defensive positions behind cargo containers and opened fire. Energy bolts filled the corridor with light and heat. Several pirates fell, but more kept coming. For every one that fell, 2 more pushed forward. Fall back, Vexith ordered, his voice strained. This wasn't going as he had expected. His team retreated toward the bulkhead doors, firing as they went. 3 of his warriors were down. The corridor behind them was filling with pirates. Then more alarms sounded. More boarding pods, this time on decks 2 and 4. 80 more hostiles pouring into the ship. On the bridge, the situation board painted a desperate picture. Red indicators showed pirate positions spreading through the ship like an infection. Engineering reported hull breaches on multiple decks. Life support was failing in some sections. Captain Soman gripped her command chair. They had minutes, maybe less. The ship would be overrun and everyone aboard would die. Or worse, they would be taken as slaves to the pirate stations in the outer reaches. Captain, Vexith's voice came through the speakers, rough with exertion. We can't hold them. There are too many. We need... An explosion cut off his transmission. Smoke began drifting onto the bridge from a nearby explosion. Alarms wailed. Crew members called out damage reports in frantic voices. Everything was falling apart. Daehyun stood at his station through all of this. His hands were steady on the controls. His breathing was calm and even. While chaos erupted around him, he remained perfectly still, like the eye of a storm. Then he moved. He stepped away from his station and walked toward Captain Soman's chair. His footsteps were silent despite the noise and panic surrounding them. Captain, he said quietly, permission to leave the bridge. Soman looked at him. Really looked at him. In that moment, she saw past the quiet lieutenant who never made trouble. She saw something else, something that had been hiding in plain sight for 3 years. Lieutenant, she said slowly, are you certain? They've left me no choice, Daehyun replied. His voice was still soft, but now it carried an edge. Cold, sharp, final. I need to access the armory. Soman's hands shook slightly as she entered her override code into her command console. Restricted sections unlocked. May the void forgive me, she whispered. Armory access granted. Locker 17. Daehyun nodded once. Then he turned and walked toward the lift. No one else on the bridge noticed him leave. They were too busy trying to save the ship, Science Officer Linus noticed. She watched him go on the security feeds, her compound eyes tracking his movement. She pulled up additional camera views, following his path through the smoke-filled corridors. Crew members fled past Daehyun as he walked. They were running away from the fighting. He walked toward it. His pace never changed, steady, purposeful. Like a man who had done this many times before, he reached the armory. The doors opened at his command. Inside were racks of standard-issue weapons and armor. He walked past all of them to the back wall. Locker 17. It had a biometric lock and a warning label, restricted, human armed forces only. Daehyun placed his hand on the scanner. The lock recognized him immediately. The locker opened with a hiss of hydraulics. Inside was armor unlike anything else on the ship. Matte black composite material, scarred and dented from countless battles, custom weapons maintained with perfect care, and a small data chip on a chain. Daehyun picked up the chip. He reached behind his ear and inserted it into the neural port hidden there. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his eyes changed. His pupils dilated. Data flooded into his brain. Tactical protocols, combat algorithms, target acquisition systems. Everything he had tried to lock away. He began putting on the armor. Each piece locked into place with quiet clicks. He checked his weapons with movements that were automatic, ingrained by years of training and hundreds of operations. Linus watched on her monitor. The change in his body language was impossible to miss. Where before he moved with humble restraint, now every motion was precise and lethal, a predator preparing to hunt. Daehyun rolled his shoulders once. He checked his weapon's power cell. Then he spoke into his communicator, his voice completely different now. Cold, mechanical, empty of emotion. All crew, clear decks 2 through 5. I need a clean operating zone. He stepped out of the armory and disappeared into the smoke-filled corridor, moving toward the pirate-controlled sections with inhuman speed. The quiet lieutenant was gone. In his place was something else. Something the galaxy had whispered about in frightened voices. The Reaper had awakened. Deck 3 had become a war zone. Smoke hung thick in the air, making it hard to see more than a few meters ahead. The corridor was littered with debris from the boarding action. Sparks rained down from damaged ceiling panels. The smell of burned metal and plasma discharge filled the air. Commander Vexith crouched behind an overturned cargo container with what remained of his security team. 6 warriors. That was all he had left. 3 more lay dead in the corridor behind them. The pirates had pushed them back to the bulkhead doors. There was nowhere left to retreat. Through the smoke, Vexith could hear the pirates advancing. They were laughing, mocking them in different alien languages. They knew they had won. It was just a matter of time now. Prepare for final stand, Vexith ordered his team. His voice was hoarse from shouting orders. His armor was scorched and dented. One of his 4 arms hung useless from a plasma burn. His warriors readied their weapons. They were brave. They were trained. But they all knew this was the end. Too many enemies. Too little ammunition. No way to win. Then something changed. The pirates' voices grew quieter, uncertain. Vexith's translator picked up fragments of their words. Confusion, then alarm. A pirate screamed. The sound cut off abruptly. Then another scream, and another. But no one was firing weapons. No energy blasts lit up the smoke. Just silence between the screams. The pirates started firing blindly into the smoke. Their weapons lit up the corridor with wild bursts of energy. They were shouting now, their voices panicked. They weren't advancing anymore. They were retreating, running. Vexith raised one hand, signaling his team to hold fire. Something was happening. Something was killing the pirates. But he couldn't see what. 4 pirates burst through the smoke, running at full speed toward Vexith's position. They weren't attacking. They were fleeing. Their weapons hung forgotten at their sides. Their eyes were wide with terror. Shadow Demon, one of them screamed in broken coalition standard. It's hunting us. A figure emerged from the smoke behind them. Black armor, moving with mechanical precision. A weapon raised. 4 shots faster than Vexith could track. 4 bodies hit the floor before they could take another step. The figure stepped over the bodies without breaking stride. As it came closer, Vexith's mandibles dropped open in shock. He recognized the armor. More importantly, he recognized the human inside it, Lieutenant Daehyun. The quiet officer he had mocked for weeks, the weak human he had shoved around like a child. But this wasn't the same person. This was something else entirely. The armor was covered in blood splatter. Every movement was precise and controlled. His weapon moved in perfect arcs, tracking threats that Vexith couldn't even see yet. His eyes were cold and empty. There was no emotion there, no hesitation, just lethal purpose. Daehyun didn't even glance at Vexith. His attention was focused forward, scanning for more targets. When he spoke, his voice came through speakers in his helmet. Cold, mechanical. Nothing like the soft tone Vexith remembered. Deck 3 secure. Moving to Deck 4. Then he was gone, disappearing back into the smoke like a ghost. Vexith and his team stood in stunned silence. Around them lay the bodies of 40 pirates. Not one coalition crew member had been harmed. Every pirate had been killed with single precise shots. One of Vexith's warriors spoke, his voice shaking. "Commander, what was that?" Vexith couldn't answer. He had no words for what he had just witnessed. On Deck 4, 30 pirates had fortified themselves in the engineering section. They had barricaded the doors and set up firing positions. They thought they were safe. They were wrong. Daehyun entered through a maintenance shaft in the ceiling. By the time they realized he was there, half of them were already dead. He moved through their positions like a shadow. One shot per target. No wasted ammunition. No unnecessary movement. The pirates tried to organize a defense. They were experienced fighters. They had raided dozens of ships, but nothing in their experience had prepared them for this. Daehyun wasn't fighting them. He was hunting them. Systematically. Efficiently. Like a machine designed for one purpose. 8 minutes after he entered the engineering section, it was over. 30 bodies. 0 survivors. On the bridge, Science Officer Linus watched through the ship's internal sensors. She had access to old human military files, following encrypted paths and bypassing security protocols. What she found made her antenna tremble. Operation Ghostwind, the Reaper. Confirmed kills 10,274. Successful solo operations 47. Status: active kill protocol authorized. The files showed planetary conflicts that ended within days of his deployment. Enemy forces that surrendered en masse rather than face him. Entire military compounds going silent overnight. The Reaper wasn't a soldier. He was a force of nature. "A surgical strike made flesh, Captain," Linus said quietly. "I think you need to see this." Captain Somin came to her station. She glanced at the screen and shook her head. "I know, officer. I've known for 3 years. Then why is he here?" Linus asked. "Why is someone like that working as a liaison officer on a diplomatic vessel?" "Because he's trying to be something else," Somin replied. "Something other than a killer. I hope this doesn't break him." Deck 2 was next. 20 pirates had been trying to reach the bridge. They never made it. Daehyun intercepted them in a narrow corridor. None of them managed to send a distress call. None of them saw him coming. They just died one after another until the corridor was silent. On Warlord Kragan's flagship, the pirate lord was growing concerned. His boarding teams had stopped reporting. All of them. "Over 100 warriors, silence, get me a status report." He roared at his tactical officer. "What's happening on that ship? I don't know, Warlord," the officer stammered. "No one is responding. We're not getting any transmissions at all." Kragan slammed his fist on his command chair.
"Send the elite guard."
10 of my best warriors, full combat armor. Tell them to find out what's happening and kill anything that gets in their way." A boarding pod launched from the flagship. Inside were 10 warriors who had never failed a mission. They wore the best armor, carried the best weapons. They had killed hundreds between them. They were confident as they burned through space toward the Harmony's edge. They docked at the main port. Their helmet cameras transmitted live feedback to Kragan's bridge. He watched as they entered the ship, weapons ready. What they found stopped them cold. Bodies. Everywhere. Corridors filled with dead pirates. Not a single coalition crew member among them. The elite guards spread out searching for survivors. There were none. "What could do this?" one of them whispered. His camera panned across the carnage, then the lights went out. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in red shadow. The elite guard formed a defensive circle, their weapons pointing in all directions. Something moved in the shadows. Too fast to track clearly. The first warrior's camera showed a blur of black armor. Then static. The second camera caught a glimpse of a weapon firing. Then static. One by one, the feeds cut out. The last warrior's camera stayed active the longest. Kragan watched through his eyes as a figure approached. Black armor covered in blood, moving with inhuman precision. The warrior fired his weapon. The shots didn't slow the figure down. The camera captured a clear image of Daehyun's face through his helmet visor before everything went dark. His expression was cold, empty. The look of someone who had done this thousands of times before. Kragan froze the image. He enhanced it, stared at that human face. For the first time in his long career of raiding and killing, Warlord Kragan felt real fear. "Find out who that human is," he ordered his intelligence officer. "Access every database you can. I need to know what we're dealing with." On the Harmony's edge, Daehyun stood in the docking bay where the elite guard had entered, 10 more bodies at his feet. His armor systems ran diagnostics. Weapon ammunition 73%. Shield integrity 92%. Physical condition optimal. He activated his communicator. "Captain Soman, all hostile boarders eliminated. Total count 143. 0 friendly casualties. Requesting permission to proceed with offensive operations." There was a long pause before Soman responded. Her voice was quiet, strained. "What do you mean by offensive operations, Lieutenant?" Daehyun looked out through the docking port at the pirate ships surrounding them. His targeting systems automatically identified weak points in their hulls. Access routes, critical systems. "I'm going to their ships, Captain. I'm going to end this." On Vexith's communicator, he heard Linus's voice speaking to someone on the bridge. "He means he's going to board the pirate vessels, alone. And judging by what I've seen, I believe he can do it." Vexith looked around at the bodies surrounding his position. He thought about the quiet human he had mocked, the weak lieutenant he had pushed around, and he realized with absolute certainty that he had been wrong about everything. In the war room of Kragan's flagship, officers gathered around a holographic display. The intelligence officer had managed to break through some encryption on the human military databases. What they found made every warrior in the room go silent. The display showed fragments of classified files. Operation Ghost Wind. 3 planetary conflicts ended within 72 hours of deployment. Enemy casualties 98%, friendly casualties 0. Codename, The Reaper. The humans use him as a ghost story, the intelligence officer explained, his voice shaking. Enemy forces would surrender when they heard he was coming. Entire armies would lay down their weapons rather than face him. The files say he's responsible for over 10,000 confirmed kills, all in close quarters combat, all solo operations. Kragan stared at the frozen image of Daehyun's face. That cold, empty expression. "One human did all that?" "Not against them, Warlord," the officer corrected. "Through them. He doesn't fight armies. He eliminates them, methodically, systematically, like a force of nature." Another officer spoke up. "Warlord, we should withdraw. We've already lost over 100 warriors. If even half these files are accurate—" "Silence!" Kragan roared. But even as he gave the order, doubt crept into his mind. He had built his reputation on fearlessness, on never backing down, but the evidence was right there in front of him. Every boarding team silent, every elite warrior dead, and that human was still alive. A communication request came through from the Harmony's edge. Kragan hesitated, then accepted. Captain Soman's face appeared on the view screen. "Warlord Kragan," she said calmly, "I have a proposition for you." Kragan leaned forward. Up close, he could see the tension in her face, the weight of command. "You have the Reaper aboard your vessel," he said. It wasn't a question, Soman didn't deny it. "I do, and he's asked for permission to board your ships. I can give that permission, or you can withdraw immediately and let us leave in peace." "You're bluffing," Kragan said, but his voice lacked conviction. "One human can't take 8 warships. That's impossible, is it?" Soman asked quietly. "Your boarding parties are all dead. Your elite guard is dead, and he did that on a ship with limited space and hundreds of potential hostages to worry about. Imagine what he can do on your ships where he doesn't need to hold back." Kragan's tactical officer was frantically checking displays. "Warlord, I'm detecting a small craft launching from the diplomatic vessel." "It's heading directly for us. Destroy it!" Kragan ordered. "It's too fast, sir. It's using some kind of stealth technology. I can't get a clear lock. Wait. It's already docked." "How did—" Alarm lights began flashing throughout the flagship. Security teams rushed to the docking port. 20 heavily armed guards took defensive positions, their weapons trained on the airlock. The airlock door had been forced open. Not hacked, physically torn from its seals. 20 guards aimed at the dark corridor beyond. Daehyun appeared at the far end of the corridor. He walked toward them at a steady pace. Not running, not hiding, just walking forward like he was taking a casual stroll. Open fire, the guard captain screamed. Energy bolts filled the corridor with deadly light, but Daehyun didn't stop. He moved between the shots with movements that seemed impossible. His body twisted and turned with perfect timing. Not one shot connected, and while he moved, he returned fire. Single shots, perfect accuracy. By the time he reached their position, all 20 guards were dead. He hadn't broken stride, hadn't slowed down. He just walked through them like they weren't there. Kragan watched on internal sensors as Daehyun moved through his ship. Every squad sent to stop him was eliminated within minutes. The human wasn't just killing them, he was dismantling the ship from the inside. He sabotaged weapon systems as he passed them, planted explosives on critical junctions, disabled life support in sections he had already cleared. He's not just trying to survive, Kragan's tactical officer whispered in horror. He's taking the ship apart methodically like he knows exactly where everything is. 3 of the other pirate ships tried to flee. Their engines exploded the moment they tried to engage faster than light drives. Daehyun had sabotaged their docking clamps during his approach. Small charges placed with perfect precision. Those ships were dead in space now, systems failing. Officers began abandoning their posts on Kragan's flagship. They fled to escape pods, preferring the void of space to facing whatever was coming. Kragan didn't stop them. He couldn't blame them. He was considering doing the same thing. The bridge doors sparked and exploded inward. Smoke poured through the opening. Through it walked Daehyun, his armor covered in scorch marks and blood. His weapon hung at his side, but his presence filled the entire bridge with menace. Kragan stood alone. His crew had fled minutes ago. He was 8 feet of pure muscle and rage. He had conquered dozens of worlds. He had never been defeated. But standing there looking at the small human in front of him, he knew this was different. "You're just one human," Kragan said. His voice was rough with confusion and fear. "How is this possible?" Daehyun's voice came through his helmet speakers. Still cold. Still mechanical. "You made assumptions based on appearance. You saw a quiet human and thought that meant weakness. You confused patience with inability. You were wrong," Kragan roared and charged. His massive form covered the distance in 3 strides. His fist came down like a hammer. Daehyun stepped aside at the last moment. The fist crashed into the deck plating, leaving a dent. Before Kragan could recover, Daehyun struck. A single precise blow to a nerve cluster in the warlord's neck. Kragan collapsed. He was still conscious, but his body wouldn't respond. He lay on the deck, unable to move, staring up at the human standing over him. "Order your remaining ships to surrender," Daehyun said. "I'd prefer not to kill anyone else today." Kragan's pride screamed at him to refuse. But his survival instinct was stronger. He had seen what this human could do. He had no doubt that Daehyun could take the remaining 7 ships if he needed to. And he would do it alone. "Open communication channel," Kragan managed to say. Daehyun activated the ship-wide broadcast. Kragan's face appeared on every screen in the pirate fleet. Behind him stood the armored human, weapon at rest but presence dominating the entire frame. "All ships," Kragan said, each word coming with difficulty. "Stand down. Drop shields. Power down weapons. Surrender to Coalition authority." He paused, then added the words that cost him everything. "The human, the Reaper, is not something we can fight. We surrender." Across the fleet, 7 massive warships dropped their shields, weapons powered down. Crews abandoned their posts and waited for Coalition security forces to arrive. One ship tried to flee. Its engines exploded before it could jump to faster than light. Daehyun had planted charges on all of them. On the Harmony's edge, the bridge crew watched in stunned silence. Vexith stood at his security station, all 4 arms hanging at his sides. His mandibles moved, but no sound came out. He tried to process what he had witnessed. Failed. Tried again. "I mocked him," Vexith finally said. His voice was barely a whisper. "I called him weak. I pushed him around. I could have. He could have." Science Officer Linus stood beside him, her compound eyes reflecting the displays. "He could have ended you at any moment, Commander. With one hand, probably without even thinking about it. But he didn't. He chose not to. That restraint, that's the most terrifying part of all of this. Captain Soman watched the pirate fleet surrender. Coalition security vessels were already jumping into the system, summoned by her distress calls hours ago. They would take custody of the pirates, transfer them to proper detention facilities. The crisis was over, but she knew something else had happened here. Something that couldn't be undone. The quiet lieutenant who wanted to leave his past behind had been forced to become the Reaper again. And everyone aboard this ship had seen it. They knew what he was now. There was no hiding anymore. Ambassador Thex sat in his quarters, his belief in peaceful negotiation shaken to its core. He had seen what happened when words failed. When violence became necessary, he would never forget the carnage, the efficiency, the cold precision of death delivered by a single human. A small craft departed from the pirate flagship. It docked with the Harmony's edge. Daehyun walked through the airlock, his armor still covered in battle damage. He moved through the corridors and crew members pressed themselves against the walls to let him pass. They didn't meet his eyes. They were afraid. That was the part that hurt most. Not the killing, not the violence, not the memories of all those faces, but the fear in the eyes of his crewmates, the way they looked at him now. Like he was a monster. Maybe they were right. He reached the armory and carefully removed his armor. Piece by piece, each one went back into locker 17. The weapons, the equipment, the data chip. He locked it all away, hoping he would never need it again. But he knew the truth. The quiet lieutenant was gone forever. Everyone knew what he was now. There was no going back to invisible. No returning to that peaceful corner table where nobody noticed him. The Reaper had awakened. And even though the fighting was over, the legend would never die. 3 days had passed since the pirate attack. Coalition security ships had taken Kragan and his forces away. The Harmony's edge was being repaired at a nearby station. New hull plates covered the boarding breaches. Fresh paint hid the burn marks. But the atmosphere aboard the ship had changed in ways that no repair could fix. Daehyun sat alone in the mess hall at his usual corner table. He was back in his standard uniform, reading from his data tablet just like before, but everything was different now. The room fell silent when he entered. Crew members gave him a wide berth. Nobody sat near him. Nobody made eye contact. He could hear them whispering. The words carried across the quiet room even though they tried to be subtle. Reaper. Killer. Dangerous. 10,000 dead. The quiet lieutenant who had been invisible for 3 years was now the only thing anyone could see. In the corridors, officers would step aside when he approached. Not out of respect. Out of fear. During bridge duty, his fellow crew members were overly polite. Too careful with their words. Like they were afraid he might snap at any moment. Even Ambassador Thex avoided him now. The Ordovian diplomat who believed in peace above all else couldn't look at Daehyun without seeing the bodies. The blood, the cold efficiency of death. His beliefs had been shaken and he blamed the human for that. Daehyun noticed all of this. He felt the weight of their fear pressing down on him. But he said nothing. He simply continued his duties, kept to himself, and tried to pretend everything was normal. It wasn't working. Late one night he went to the training room. He needed to move, to exercise, to do something other than sit alone with his thoughts. The room was empty when he arrived. He began running through combat drills, his body moving through forms that were burned into his muscle memory. The door opened. Daehyun stopped mid-movement. Commander Vexith stood in the doorway. The massive Kralix warrior seemed uncertain. Hesitant, that was new. Vexith had never been uncertain about anything. Commander, Daehyun said quietly, I was just finishing. He moved to leave. Wait, Vexith said. The word came out rough, uncomfortable. I wanted to apologize, Lieutenant. My behavior before the attack was inexcusable. Daehyun stopped. He turned to face the Kralix commander. There's nothing to apologize for, Commander. Yes, there is, Vexith insisted. His mandibles clicked with agitation. I mocked you, called you weak, pushed you around like you were nothing, and you saved all of us. You saved my life, the lives of my team. Daehyun sat down on a training bench. He gestured to the space beside him. After a moment, Vexith sat as well. The bench creaked under his weight. I wasn't always quiet, Commander, Daehyun said. He stared at his hands. Once I was very loud. I was efficient, precise, deadly. I was exactly what you saw 3 days ago, he told Vexith, about the human unification wars, how humanity had fought among themselves before joining the Galactic Coalition. Brother against brother, worlds burning, millions dying. The military created special soldiers to end conflicts quickly, surgical strikes made flesh. They called them Reapers. I believed I was helping, Daehyun continued, saving lives by taking others. End the war faster, prevent more deaths. That's what they told us, and I was good at it. Too good. But the killing never stopped. Each operation led to another. Each target eliminated revealed 10 more. The number grew. 100, 1,000, 10,000. Every face was burned into his memory. Every name he could learn, he remembered. When the wars ended, I requested decommission from combat operations, Daehyun said. I chose this assignment specifically, a diplomatic vessel where violence should never be necessary, where I could be someone else, someone quiet, someone peaceful. Vexith listened in silence. Understanding was slowly dawning in his eyes. Your mockery? Daehyun said. It reminded me I was still human, still someone people could underestimate and dismiss. I preferred being invisible, weak, laughable. It meant I wasn't the Reaper anymore. I was just Daehyun. You let me humiliate you, Vexith said slowly, because it gave you peace. It reminded me of who I wanted to be, Daehyun replied. Not who I was trained to be. Vexith sat back, his forearms folding across his chest. He thought about every insult, every shove, every time he had pushed the quiet human around, and he realized that Daehyun could have ended him at any moment, with one hand, without thinking. But he never did. That restraint was more impressive than any display of strength. My people have a saying, Vexith said. The greatest warrior is not the one who wins every battle, but the one who doesn't need to fight at all. Daehyun nodded. That's what I'm trying to learn, Commander. How to be that person. Vexith stood. He offered his hand. I would be honored if you would train with me, Lieutenant. Not as opponents, as warriors seeking wisdom. Daehyun accepted the handshake. For the first time in days, a slight smile crossed his face. It was small, brief, but it was there. Over the following weeks, things slowly changed. Vexith became Daehyun's advocate. He explained to other crew members what he had learned, that the quiet human wasn't a monster. He was someone trying very hard to be better than what he was trained to be, that his restraint was his true strength. Crew members began to understand. The fear didn't disappear completely. How could it? They had seen what he was capable of, but it transformed into something else, respect, appreciation. They realized he had saved them all while holding back. While trying not to be the killer he once was, Science Officer Linus completed her research on human combat doctrine. She discovered something remarkable. Humans created warriors like Daehyun, trained them to be deadly, then gave them the choice to walk away. Most species would never allow such dangerous individuals freedom, but humans understood that true strength included choice. It's not that humans are naturally violent, Linus explained to the senior staff one day. It's that they understand violence so well they can choose peace. That's what makes them unique. 6 months later, the mess hall was busy during lunch. Daehyun sat at his usual corner table. But this time he wasn't alone. Vexith sat across from him, discussing combat philosophy. Linus sat beside them, adding her scientific perspective. Several other crew members had joined the conversation. A new crew member entered. Young, brash, fresh from the academy. He saw the human and made a comment about how weak humans were, about how they didn't belong in space. The table fell silent. Vexith rose to his full height. All 4 arms crossed over his massive chest. His voice carried across the entire mess hall. You see that quiet human? He saved this ship. He saved all of us, and he did it with a restraint that puts every warrior I know to shame. You will treat him with the respect he's earned. The new crew member stammered an apology. Daehyun waved it off. It's fine, Commander. He didn't know. Later that evening, Captain Soman found Daehyun on the observation deck. He stood alone, watching the stars stream past as the ship traveled through space. She joined him at the window. Any regrets about that day? She asked quietly. Daehyun was quiet for a long moment. Every death weighs on me, Captain. All of them. But they were necessary to protect innocence. To save the crew. I can live with that. The crew doesn't fear you anymore, Soman said. They understand now. Good, Daehyun replied. I prefer being underestimated anyway. It's safer for everyone, Soman smiled. Something tells me that won't be possible anymore. Word has spread. Other ships. Other crews. The story of the quiet lieutenant who became the Reaper is traveling across the coalition. Daehyun sighed. He had hoped to leave that name behind forever. But perhaps it was impossible. Perhaps the Reaper would always be part of who he was. The question was whether he controlled it or it controlled him. At least now they know, he said finally. The quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous, and true strength lies in choosing when not to use your power. Soman nodded. They stood together in comfortable silence watching the stars. The ship was safe. The crew was safe. And Lieutenant Daehyun had found a new kind of peace. Not the peace of invisibility, but the peace of acceptance. He was the Reaper. He would always carry that name. Those memories. That weight. But he was also Daehyun, a quiet man who preferred reading to fighting, a peaceful soul trapped in a warrior's body. And now, for the first time, his crew understood both sides of him. That understanding was worth more than any amount of invisibility. It was worth the fear, the revelation, the loss of anonymity. Because now he didn't have to hide. He could be both people, the warrior and the scholar, the killer and the peaceful soul. The mess hall would never be the same. His corner table was now a gathering place. Crew members sought his wisdom about combat and restraint. They asked him questions about human philosophy and the choice between violence and peace. He became a teacher, sharing what he had learned through pain and blood, and through it all he remained quiet, thoughtful, careful with his words and his actions, because that's who he truly wanted to be, not the Reaper who killed 10,000 enemies, but Daehyun who chose peace whenever possible and violence only when necessary. The galaxy would remember the story. The quiet human who destroyed an entire pirate fleet alone. The legend would grow with each telling. But those who served with him knew the truth. They knew that the real story wasn't about the killing. It was about the restraint, the choice,